last person Kiki Shepard trusted was the one person she never should have. And on a quiet autumn evening, neighbors would later remember seeing her standing by her window phone, pressed to her ear, her voice controlled but shaking beneath the surface, a moment that seemed ordinary yet would become the final glimpse of her alive. Because by morning, Kiki Shepard, a devoted single mother known for her quiet strength and careful nature, had vanished without a trace, her car still outside her home, her belongings untouched. But something invisible had already gone terribly wrong, and at the center of it all was a man named Marcus Hale, someone who was never supposed to be a threat because he wasn't a stranger. He was trusted. He had slowly worked his way into her life, presenting himself as dependable, supportive, even protective, the kind of presence that feels safe until it isn't. And what no one saw at first was how that trust began to twist into control, subtle changes turning into constant monitoring, unexpected visits turning into silent pressure, until Kiki herself began to feel it, telling a co-worker she felt watched, though she never said his name. The dramatic irony being that the person she leaned on was already tightening his grip, and when she finally tried to break free, when she told Marcus it was over, that he needed to leave her life for good, the balance of power shifted in a way she could never take back, because for Marcus, losing control wasn't an option, it was a threat. And on that final night, what began as a confrontation escalated into something irreversible, something violent, something final. And the next day, while friends worried and police began their search, Marcus played his role, perfectly concerned, cooperative, even helpful, joining searches, speaking calmly, answering questions as if he too was looking for answers. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully it is buried. Security footage placed his car near her home. At times, he denied phone records, told a different story, and deleted messages recovered from Kiki's cloud, revealed fear, resistance, and a final desperate attempt to push him away. And in that moment, the entire case turned. The helpful friend became the prime suspect, and under interrogation, the confidence Marcus once carried began to crack his words. Slowed, his story shifted, and eventually the weight of evidence became too much, and he confessed, admitting that the woman who trusted him had become the woman he could not control. And in a moment driven by obsession and rage, he ended her life, believing he could erase it, believing he could walk away. But he underestimated the one thing no one escapes: the truth, because her remains were found exactly where he insisted they wouldn't be, sealing his fate. And in the courtroom, the power he once held was gone, replaced by silence, as Kiki's family listened to the details of a life stolen by betrayal and control. And when the verdict came guilty, life without parole, it brought justice, but not peace, because nothing could return what was taken. And in the end, Kiki Shepard's story leaves behind a lesson that lingers long after the case is closed: that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it grows quietly inside trust. Sometimes it wears the face of someone familiar. And the most painful truth of all is that the instincts we ignore are often the ones trying to save us, because trust should never come at the cost of your safety, and walking away at the right moment can be the difference between survival and becoming a story others are left to tell. The courtroom may have delivered its verdict, and Marcus Hale may have been sentenced to life without parole. But for investigators and for Kiki Shepard's family, the case was far from over, because justice had been served. Yet the truth still felt incomplete. And it started with something small, something almost forgettable, a single inconsistency buried deep in the evidence logs, a timestamp that didn't align with Marcus's confession. At first, it looked like a technical error, but when analysts revisited the digital trail, they realized something unsettling. Marcus's timeline, while detailed and seemingly airtight, left a narrow but undeniable gap, a period of nearly 40 minutes unaccounted for on the night Kiki died, and that gap changed everything, because Marcus had confessed to acting alone. He described the confrontation, the violence, and the disposal of evidence with chilling precision. Yet the data suggested movement that didn't match a single person acting under pressure. It suggested coordination. And suddenly, the narrative shifted again. The man who had once controlled Kiki's life and then controlled the story of her death might not have been the only one involved. Investigators reopened key pieces of evidence quietly this time, avoiding media attention, reanalyzing surveillance from nearby streets, enhancing audio fragments from a neighbor's security system, and combing through Marcus's financial activity in the weeks leading up to the murder. And what they found began to unravel a second layer of the case: transactions that didn't make sense, payments sent to an unknown account, followed by abrupt withdrawals, and then there were the calls, not to friends, not to family, but to a number that appeared only briefly in the records and then disappeared completely: a burner phone. And when technicians managed to partially reconstruct the deleted communication, they found something that sent a chill through the entire team. A short message sent just hours before Kiki vanished. "Tonight has to be clean. No mistakes." It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing either. And for Kiki's family, it reopened wounds they thought had finally begun to close, because if Marcus hadn't acted alone, then someone else had been out there, someone who had watched, planned, and possibly even helped carry out the final moments of her life. And the most disturbing part was the possibility that this person had never been questioned, never been identified, and was still free, living quietly while the world believed the case was solved. The dramatic irony was almost unbearable. Marcus had lost all power, sitting behind bars, his fate sealed. Yet somewhere beyond those prison walls, another piece of the truth still existed, untouched and hidden. And when detectives returned to Marcus with the new findings, expecting resistance, they got something far more unsettling: a smile, faint but unmistakable, the kind that suggested control hadn't fully slipped away, because when asked about the missing 40 minutes, Marcus leaned forward and spoke just once, his voice calm, almost satisfied. "You're asking the wrong question." And when pressed further, he refused to elaborate. No anger, no denial, just silence, as if he knew something they didn't, as if the real story had never truly been told. And in that moment, the entire case shifted once again, because justice may have been served for Kiki Shepard, but the truth was still out there waiting. And as investigators traced the last known signal of that burner phone to a remote location miles outside the city, a place never mentioned in Marcus's confession, they realized they were no longer closing a case. They were stepping into something unfinished, something deeper, something that might change everything. They thought they knew. And just before the team moved in to search that location, a new piece of evidence came through: a recently recovered audio fragment, too distorted to fully understand, except for one clear, unmistakable detail: a second voice in the background. Not Marcus, not Kiki, someone else. And the final words, captured before the recording cut to silence, were enough to stop the investigation. Cold, "Are you sure she knows?" The discovery of a second voice shattered any illusion that Kiki Shepard's case was truly closed, and as investigators moved toward the remote location tied to the burner phone, the tension within the team shifted from quiet doubt to urgent certainty that they were no longer dealing with a single perpetrator, but something far more calculated, because the coordinates led them to an abandoned property, long forgotten by most, a decaying structure surrounded by overgrown brush, isolated enough to hide secrets, yet close enough to suggest intention. And as they stepped inside, the air felt heavy, as if the space itself had been waiting to be uncovered. And what they found inside confirmed their worst suspicions: remnants of recent activity, footprints preserved in dried mud, discarded materials that didn't belong, and most chilling of all, a hidden compartment beneath loose floorboards containing items that should have never been there. A second phone partially damaged but still recoverable, a set of gloves, and a notebook filled with fragmented entries, coded phrases, times, dates, and references that didn't immediately make sense but clearly connected to something larger than a single crime. And when forensic teams began reconstructing the phone's data, the pieces started aligning in a way that made the entire case darker than anyone had imagined. Messages exchanged not just between Marcus Hale and an unknown number, but multiple contacts, each one using the same pattern. Short, precise instructions, no names, no emotions, just coordination. And among those messages, one stood out, sent days before Kiki's death. She's starting to question everything, followed by another reply, then it can't wait. And suddenly, the narrative took on a new and terrifying dimension, because this wasn't just obsession or control, this was planning, this was surveillance, this was a decision made long before that final night. And the dramatic irony cut deeper than ever. Kiki had sensed something was wrong. She had tried to pull away, but she was already inside something she couldn't fully see. And as investigators dug further into the notebook, they uncovered references to other dates, other locations, other initials, none of which matched Kiki Shepard. And that's when the fear shifted into something else entirely, because if those entries meant what they appeared to mean, then Kiki may not have been the first, and possibly not the last. And when detectives returned to Marcus with this new evidence, expecting him to finally break, what they got instead was something far more unsettling. He didn't deny it. He didn't react with surprise. He simply listened. And when they mentioned the second phone and the notebook, his expression changed, not to fear, but to something closer to recognition, as if a line had been crossed that he never expected them to reach. And for the first time, he spoke more than a single sentence, his voice low, controlled, but no longer guarded. "You were never supposed to find that place." And in that moment, it became clear. Marcus had not been acting alone, but he also had not been in control of everything. Because as investigators pressed harder, demanding names, demanding explanations, he leaned back and said something that shifted the entire investigation yet again. "You think I started this, but I didn't. I just followed through." And those words sent a ripple through everyone in the room, because if Marcus wasn't the origin, then someone else had set everything in motion. Someone who remained hidden, someone who had managed to stay completely out of reach. And as digital forensics traced one of the recovered contacts to a real identity, a name finally surfaced, a person with no prior connection to Marcus on record. No criminal history and no obvious link to Kiki Shepard. Someone who existed completely outside the narrative they had built, and yet the data didn't lie. The calls, the messages, the coordination, it all pointed back to this individual. And just as investigators prepared to bring that person in for questioning, the case took another unexpected turn, because that individual had already disappeared. Their home abandoned, their devices wiped, and a single detail left behind that made everything even more unsettling: a printed photograph of Kiki Shepard taken days before her death, standing outside her home, unaware she was being watched, and written on the back, in careful, deliberate handwriting, were the words, she wasn't supposed to matter, and as the team stood there, realizing how deep this case truly went, a final piece of data came through from the recovered phone. A scheduled message that had never been sent, a draft left behind as if waiting for the right moment, and when they opened it, the room fell silent because it contained only one line: "If anything goes wrong, there's a backup." And suddenly, the question was no longer who helped Marcus or who planned it, but how many others were still out there, and what exactly the backup meant.